Good morning. This is Hammersmith Chess Club. Junior Hour Basics in 5 minutes or so. This video is the summary of a session we had in May 2020 on the pawns. When watching the video, you can stop at any time when you want to understand a new position or try to find a solution to a problem yourself. The pawns are the weakest pieces on the board. They can only move in one direction, forward. They can never move backwards. And they only move one step at a time, except at the start here. And yet, the pawns have the largest potential. They can, once reaching the last rank, be promoted to any other piece except the king. And they can develop their strength exponentially together with the other pawns. The pawn structure at the beginning of a chess game is ideal, because it has no isolated pawns, no double pawns, no backward pawns. These are the themes we will touch in this video. The more the pawns move forward, the more weaknesses they might create in their structure. So be careful with any pawn move or exchange. The first two examples show a very positive aspect of the pawns. They are very strong, even in isolation, when they are passed. Passed pawns cannot be hindered in their advance by other pawns. In this position, we do not yet have passed pawns. However, it is the intention both of white and of black to create passed pawns. Usually, passed pawns are more dangerous when they are farther away from the opposing king, especially in endgames where the kings have the same slow speed as the pawns, one square at a time. Now let's see how white should go ahead. First move, b4. So let's just look at what happens if there is a pawn race. So now white has a passed pawn on h file, black on a file, but white's is farther advanced. Can be promoted to the queen before black can promote. And now when black promotes, the queens can be exchanged, and white has a second passed pawn that will decide the game. Now, at the very beginning, if white would not have moved b4 but a4, then black has a chance to create a passed pawn possibly earlier. First, it stops or blocks white in getting quickly a passed pawn. And now we see that white has to run for the pawn, for black's pawn, and black is able to catch the passed pawn, and it is a draw. Second example, again from Magnus Carlsen, shows the strength of a passed pawn even against a heavy piece and a light piece. Moving d7 would have been possible to block by bishop f6, so Carlsen moved his bishop to a6, offered to be taken. Now, if black takes, white has 3 passed pawns, not only 1, but 3 passed pawns suddenly on the 6th rank, and whatever black does, one of them will promote to queen, and white wins easily. Here we see an example where it is not one single pawn, but the structure, a good pawn structure which decides the game. Good structure is one where one pawn defends the other. So g5 is protected by h5, h4, and also by f4, but f4 is not protected yet. So white does not have an ideal structure yet, and he pushes the pawn, f pawn to f5, and now the f pawn is connected or is defended by the e pawn. So this is a good structure, and it's already quite strongly attacking the black's king side. And it can move forward. f6 is protected by g5. Now there is a pawn mass, there's a pawn storm, and that is very dangerous for the king side defense. We see how first white takes care that there are no defenders anymore, and then he pushes forward with one of the pawns of the pawn storm. And even the f pawn at the beginning on f4 is now on f7 with check. And the structure is completely broken up, destroyed, and white will mate. Now we come to the weak aspects of pawns. When it was good for the pawns to appear together as connected pawns, then it is bad when they don't have pawns on their side. d5 doesn't have a pawn on its side. And how it came to that position from the very beginning is here. The isolated pawn in the center, a very typical example, and this is very often weak. It cannot be defended by another pawn, and it cannot be blocked in its natural path. It can be blocked, especially by a knight in its natural path. While an isolated pawn may have its benefit in the middle game, it is definitely a weakness in the end game, with fewer pieces to defend it. And we see it in this example, where even the king comes to the attack. Okay, the defending king will be pushed away. Now there are two pieces required to defend the pawn. White strengthens first the position, builds up space, also on the king's side, and with a lot of maneuvering, develops an ideal pawn chain down to the 6th rank. Now the knight goes back, attacks a7. There is a nice tactical intermezzo. White sacrifices the knight, but then white can enter the kingside structure and will promote one of the pawns and win the game easily. Now we come to a last example of a negative pawn structure or aspect, double pawns. They can have their benefits, especially when they open files for the rook or the queen, but more often there are weaknesses in the pawn structure. So here is one example how such a double pawn can develop. Now already the knight is pinned, cannot be defended a second time, so any piece taking the knight on f3 will mean white has to recapture the pawn. And especially pawn structures are, when they're weakened with double pawns ahead of your king, they are very dangerous. Now the knight threatens to go to f4, f4 cannot be pushed, and of course white doesn't play the best, or doesn't play good at all in this game, in this example. Now there is a second knight coming to f4, and if white is not careful enough, the knight will finally arrive here. That's the weak square in front of a double pawn, or in the middle of the double pawn structure. It cannot be pushed away, and even it can be taken once. Queen has to go away. Now the black queen is circling in, and it's mate to 1. That shows an ideal sequence, the weakness of double pawns.